love my channel and would like to show your support, please click on the link below this video and become the patron of the Ushanka Show. For as little as $1, you can help us grow and create the new, interesting videos about the life in Soviet Union.
Hello comrades and welcome back to the Ushanka Show. Well, we're gonna do one more video about the music in Soviet Union, although I had several viewers complaining that it's getting old, this topic, but it was one of the most requested topics on my channel, so today it's actually we're definitely gonna hit several birds with a single stone, because we're gonna talk about Vladimir Vysotsky, who was extremely popular songwriter, poet, and actor. So he was doing several things and was doing great, but he became most famous for his songs. So we're gonna talk about him today. As I mentioned before, I'm not really the best guy to talk about the music in Soviet Union, especially Vladimir Vysotsky. He was pretty much mid-60s, end of 70s performer, because he died in 1980 when I was only 9 years old. So his popularity was when I was a little kid, so I actually never knew about. And of course, I heard a lot his singing, because you walk and you hear out of the windows in apartments he's singing, and you cannot miss his singing. You can't confuse him for anyone, because he had that specific voice, which he sounded like Joe Cocker somewhat, really deep, that kind of grinding voice, which later when I learned that he was Vysotsky when I was maybe in my 15, 16-year-old, I was wondering why people listen to him. He sounds so horrible. And only later, when I think I was visiting one of my friends and he had the tape, and I started actually listening to the words, then it kind of clicked. I was like, oh my God, this guy's like you. His music was really basic. He played guitar, but he used only 3 accords, so there's no good melody. He just pretty much, he was performing his poems, doing little guitar with it. So the text, the words, that was the most powerful thing about his art, about his singing, not actually singing, because he actually want to listen to what he's singing about, what he's talking about. So Vladimir Vysotsky was born in 1938 in Moscow, so right before World War II, and in 1942, or probably even 1941, he was evacuated out of Moscow with his mother. So then they came back to Moscow later, after war was over, but his father met someone else during the war, so he lived with his stepdad. So, there's I would say standard kind of life of a Soviet kid during the war and after war. He became professional actor, so he went to college and he finished the college to be an actor for the theater. And since 64, he was performing in Taganka Theater in Moscow, and that was his pretty much place when he performed all his life. Then he also was a actor in several movies, one of which that's the one you must watch if you're interested about the Soviet Union. It's «Место встречи изменить нельзя», or English translation will be «The meeting place cannot be changed». It's really good. It's more like TV series, and it's about post-war Moscow, 1946-47, I believe. I need to watch it myself again. It was so long ago. And it's like a criminal show about the Moscow gang that actually had a name, Black Cat, Черная Кошка, which was really unusual because in Soviet Union gangs didn't carry names. So that was an interesting part. And he played the role of one of the detectives, Zhiglov. And he played really well, and of course his voice, the way he talks, you can't forget that. So I strongly recommend, if you're interested in Soviet movies, to watch this show, The Meeting Place Cannot Be Changed. It's a great show. In 1965, that was his very first song that he performed he did several songs before that since 1961, but people who study his art, творчество, they think that the song from 1961, Подводная лодка, the submarine, as the one kind of really showed his level as an artist, as a singer, and I would say not as a singer, but as the songwriter, because you gotta listen to the words. And he covered different topics in his songs, and that's that classic bard style song they call. You just play some basic melody on the guitar, and you just sing. And he covered different topics, as I mentioned. He talked about war, talked about everyday life in Soviet Union. There's a lot of songs about sports. He had songs about different professions. He had songs just kind of like a humorous one, which I always remember, about circus. There's two people watching circus, and like a wife and a husband. It's a really silly song. And a lot of his songs, they had this like punchlines that became super popular and became like part of our language. One song I remember when I started listening to Vysotsky, that song really impressed me. It's called Kolya, which you can translate like a tracks, but it's a truck tracks. If a truck or SUV drives through the dirt, they leave these deep tracks. So that's the song about that our life, that we follow someone else's tracks and we're stuck inside of those. And what you need to do is attempt to get out and make your own tracks. And that's what his song is about, how there's some people attempt to do that, but they fail, and then they just lay on the side of the road, and other people just keep on rolling through the someone else's tracks. But once in a while, someone gets, hits super hard and breaks the mud and start making his own tracks, and he yells back like, hey, don't follow me, create your own tracks. So that's kind of really good song, like really good, powerful words, and they inspire you. And he had many of those, like I said, even about a submarine and some other topics that, if you don't know Russian, of course, you won't listen to his songs, because there's a singing, there's not much going on. As I mentioned, the people who analyze his singing, as just said, is really basic 3-guitar chord, which made really easy for people to perform his songs. So Vysotsky songs, that was one of the most popular songs that people played who had guitar. That you always had some songs of his because they were so good and so easy to play. Despite the fact that Vysotsky was mega popular in Soviet Union, he was never officially recognized by Soviet government. There was that bizarre situation, which happens when the government controls everything, that people were going to his concerts, but officially they weren't concerts because he wasn't a professional singer, so he wasn't allowed to perform on a concert. So the official name of the event will be Meeting with the Actor. So people come to meet the actor Vysotsky, but he'll come up on with a guitar and start singing his songs, and people will be recording. So people will bring their own tape recorders, and like they say, the concert will be mega quiet because everyone recording his singing, only you can hear just clapping after every song, or people laugh if there's something. So they'll be like, hey, I have this new song, and then of course these tapes will start being copied and spread around, and then people like, hey, do you have that concert from such and such town? He had a couple of new songs I didn't listen to. So a lot of people, listen to his songs, they perform his songs, but he was never played on TV or radio. So there was this parallel culture. You have a main Soviet culture where performers that I talked about in my previous videos, Pugacheva, Lev Leshchenko, will be singing, and then you have this parallel subculture that Soviet people actually like to listen to. One of them was Vladimir Vysotsky. And I think one of the reasons why he was so popular, because he actually was reflecting the realities of Soviet life. It was these loud words about we're marching towards communism and we're so happy. He just was telling the stories of everyday life of Soviet people, and they really kind of connected to the regular person, and that's why people really like listening to him. But as I said, I was too young to actually understand what the songs were about. But later on, and I probably need to start listening to him again because it's kind of went on the background. And unfortunately, besides being in the Soviet Union, Vladimir Vysotsky lived like a rock star, you can say, like a Soviet rock star. He was a pretty heavy drinker, and apparently he got involved with some drugs, and he was struggling with drug addiction. It's why he died so early, being only 42. Was something with drugs overdose or something like that. So it was really sad that he passed away so early. And even if his funeral wasn't publicly announced on any newspaper, I read there's over 10,000 of people gathered to say goodbye to Vladimir Vysotsky on his day of his funeral. So you could tell he was very popular among regular people, although Soviet government just kind of stonewalled him. As I said, you could never see anything or hear anything about him or any of his songs on TV or radio. Interesting detail, just to give you the idea of the magnitude of amount of influence that Vladimir Vysotsky had on Soviet people, that apparently he's number 2. Like when they made a questionnaire to think like who you think is the most like influential, most popular personality in Soviet Union, number 1 was Yuri Gagarin, the very Soviet first person that went to space. And that one was really pushed hard by Soviet propaganda, although right now I started reading some interesting stories that maybe he never went to space. It was all set up to make it look like he went to space, kind of similar to these conspiracy theories to what like Americans never went to the moon. It's all was fabricated. So Yuri Gagarin is the number 1 Soviet personality. Number 2 is Vladimir Vysotsky. So you have this Soviet cosmonaut, and on second place is the guy who just wrote the songs and played guitar. But this is how much influence he had on Soviet people. But as I said, unfortunately, he got himself into drinking, and he wrecked a lot of cars. He liked to drive fast. He had car accidents that he hit people, but I guess he had higher ups that some people who like his performance in the Soviet bureaucracy, so he was never in trouble, was never in jail for drunk driving, anything like that. And another interesting detail, in Soviet Union it was virtually impossible to purchase a foreign car. I mean, it was hard to buy just in Soviet-made car. We talked already about 9 years waiting list to purchase a Soviet Lada. Well, Vladimir Vysotsky was the very first person in the Soviet Union that officially owned Mercedes. It was a Mercedes 450 SE, and it's actually had details that it's the body style of W116. So that was the very first Mercedes registered to just the private person in the Soviet Union. After him, number 2 was Leonid Brezhnev, and number 3 was Sergei Mikhalkov, famous Soviet movie producer. So Vladimir Vysotsky was the very first private citizen of Soviet Union who managed to own German Mercedes. So that's kind of interesting detail. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of really good quality his recordings, because, as I said, most people were recording just on whatever they had, so there was not a professional studio. So a lot of his concerts, if you listen on a tape, it's just the basic concert live performance and people clapping and stuff like that. But that was all about the words. Only after Vysotsky passed away, he slowly became legal to talk about it. And only after Perestroika started in 1986, with the Gorbachev becoming a leader of Soviet Union, that it's actually, he was, admitted, he was actually a really talented person, had a big influence on Soviet culture. So in 1986, the Union of Soviet Writers of the USSR, they actually created a commission to study the literature heritage of Vysotsky. And then they publish his books, they publish his poems. So now there's a museum in Moscow and other things. But I said, unfortunately, when he was alive, he wasn't like existing on an official level, which kind of makes me think maybe what made him so good. You know, sometimes you need to have that resistance to actually, that pushes you to your best performance, like you're playing up, you're playing against the system, instead of, you know, when you be like all helped, and then it's just, there's no challenges. So maybe that's what made Vladimir Vysotsky so great. I strongly recommend to watch his movie, at least The Meeting Place Cannot Be Changed. And if it's on YouTube, I'll post a link below this video. Also, another good movie of his is called Vertical, The Vertical. It's about, I think, mountain climbing. As I said, I'm not a best person to know all the little details about him, but anyways, he's a great performer, huge influence on the life of Soviet people. And I hope they made some translation of his poems, because you'll learn a lot about Soviet life just from his poems, from his songs. Well, I hope you enjoyed the show. We will stop for now talking about music in Soviet Union, and we'll be talking about pets. I had the question come up several times, what kind of pets people have in Soviet Union, and also we're going to talk about fishing in Soviet Union. That's the next videos coming up shortly. Thank you very much. Don't forget to put the like under this video, share with your friends, share on social media, and if you can, please support my show on patreon.com, or you can just throw some money at me through PayPal. Thank you, comrades, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.